Hi, everybody. Welcome into the Irish NFL show. Happy Friday, happy weekend. It's another week. It's an international special. This week, looking at the growth and progress of the NFL outside of the US. And we are delighted to welcome in our first guest today, Brett Gosper, who is the new head of Europe and UK for the NFL. Brett, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you on, Brett. Now, we ask everybody this, and you are no exception. So before we start the football talk and just about your career, have you any affinity to Ireland? Have you any Irish heritage yourself?
I've got a huge affinity. For a start, I've been working there in the office at World Rugby, which is based in Dublin for the last nearly 9 years. And my mother's maiden name is Galway with an EY, not an AY. So Irish on my mum's side, English convict stock on my dad's side. Makes for a pretty wicked combination. Not in me, but just generally, I guess something's going on down there.
Brad, I suppose growing up in Australia, I know that you played rugby. I'm wondering, in terms of the NFL, was it when you moved to America that it first crossed your radar, or had it been, was it something that you were aware of even before then?
Yeah, a little bit before then, as a player in Australia, and I played reasonable level in Australia, and then left when I was about 21, 22, went to play in France actually. But while I was playing, even the early days while I was playing in Melbourne, which isn't exactly the rugby capital of the world, it's the AFL capital of the world, actually. I used to read American football magazines, but more for the conditioning than following the stars or whatever else. I used to read the nutritional articles, the weightlifting articles, the workout stuff, because I knew American football was it was the top. It was the top in everything. But it was professional athletes that were in superb condition. And for a rugby player who knew that American football was a bit like rugby, it was a great reference. So I kind of was always an admirer of the league, the players, and so on, but wasn't, desperately passionate about it. I was just highly respectful of it and interested in it. And yes, I lived in the States for nearly 5 years in the early part of the 2000s when I was working there with an ad agency. And got a lot more into it and baseball and other American sports during that time. And for my sins, I was still am, I guess, a Jets supporter, but also a Knicks supporter. And fortunately, I was a Yankee supporter, and they won the odd game. But so that wasn't enough to make up for the Knicks and the Jets then. But there you go.
Brett, you joined the NFL in Europe at such a fascinating period. The expansion of the game over the last decade, I suppose the establishment of the international series. Just your goals in terms of how you feel the role progressing and what you're looking forward to most, and what are the challenges ahead?
Yeah, there has been some great work put in by predecessors, people that were here before me. Alice Kirkwood, who was managing director of the UK, Mark Waller International. All of these people, put in some big yards to make London, a success story. The games in London and other aspects of NFL to grow the sport. But I guess even me being appointed, even people coming after someone for this role, not me specifically, but actually, advertising and wanting someone to come in to run Europe is already an indication of the ambitions that they have. To extend that success beyond just the UK and build the potential of NFL across Europe, where there is so much potential and already, quite significant fan growth in recent years. So that particularly means Germany. That's probably in many ways a bigger market than the United Kingdom on most criteria, other than probably broadcast revenue, but fan sizes, 19 plus million. Versus the UK, which is sitting more around the 16 million mark, with avid fans, probably 2.6 million in Germany, 2.8 in the UK, so very, very close. And France and Spain, a little bit of a distance behind, but also growing quite well in markets where there's good exposure, good broadcast, and a bit of a combination between free to air and a pay channel model and so on. We see good growth, and it's up to us then to try and expand that fan base in other ways and create interest and through the use of data and astute marketing, create excitement and interest around the game. But it certainly helps in a market when you have games. And the difference between some of these markets is having tangible games, not just exhibition games or preseason games, but real regular season NFL games. And that's, I think, what's made the huge difference for London in recent times. London.
Yeah, Brett, I was going to say Knicks and Jets. I didn't realize you didn't like yourself very much. But, look, you alluded to it. We know you're very familiar with Irish Shores, your last role there as CEO of World Rugby, of course. And, it strikes me your tenure there was extremely notable, if you don't mind me saying. Like, there was a massive increase in the expansion and growth of rugby. There was the return of the sport to the Olympics in Rio. And really something that people never thought tenable before. Like your team there carried out a super successful World Cup in Asia, in Japan in 2019. You kind of alluded to the growth internationally, but are there kind of lessons or experiences in those achievements that you're going to look back to or look to hope to bring in to the growth plans for the NFL internationally?
Yeah, look, I think there are some basic principles, and I don't think the NFL are moving, that far beyond already those principles. I think, there are other challenges in American football, but there are some similarities. They're both quite complicated games. For the average viewer who tends to be outside of America, a football, soccer follower, let's call it, games that are a little bit easier to follow. So there's a little bit of a barrier that games like rugby and American football are a little bit complex. The extra challenge with the American sport is the participation levels are quite low, but it's a challenger sport. Like rugby is a challenger sport, and visibility of the sport is part of the secret, and convincing networks and free-to-air stations that it's worthwhile. If they back the sport, it will grow. And rugby is in that position. A lot of markets, not so much in the established traditional rugby markets, but certainly in those markets where we were seeking a big uptick in participation. So in that sense, there's a lot of parallels. Europe is a challenger market for the NFL, and a lot of the things that we meet in markets like the US for rugby and even parts of Asia and South America and so on, you're confronting similar things. What can make the sport more visible? What can make the sport more tangible? Because the example of the sport is, Six Nations, the rugby championship in the South, maybe some of the league games, the Premiership and so on. All of whether they're always somewhere else. The examples of the great sport are elsewhere. You've got to bring that tangibility to it. Participation is important. Also, having some people that actually shine. We have a international player pathway program and an academy program in the UK where we don't just have UK students, but foreign students, that some of which have gone on to become notable NFL players and therefore create that sense of relevancy to a local market. And all of those things are very relevant. The other parallel is flag football is a strong development game, obviously, particularly in the United States, but for men and women. And the women's aspect of the game was another area in rugby that injected a huge amount of growth into the sport. The Olympic opportunity was very much showing women and girls that rugby was for them as well, both as spectators and as players. And flag can play that role also with American football. And there are some ambitions, and I'm trying to gauge that. There's certainly ambitions in certain quarters of the NFL that flag football could well be an Olympic sport, particularly potentially being one of those optional sports that the local organizer of the Olympics in 2028 in Los Angeles could opt to take flag as a sport, and then you build on that and hopefully stay with it. And the Olympics is a huge growth opportunity for any sport because it gives you incredible footprint exposure during the week or two that you're in the Olympics. But there's also extra funding coming in from National Olympic Committees and even the IC Solidarity. You're also on scholarship lists and school curriculum automatically if you're an Olympic sport in so many countries around the world. And finally, you get to talk to governments. I mean, when rugby became an Olympic sport, you go to China, go to Russia, and you will meet with the Minister of Sport. If you're not an Olympic, and you can talk about, we're lacking stadia here. How can we, do more to get the sport into schools? How can we all of these conversations are very valid conversations when in Olympic sport. So yes, long answer to which there are many parallels, I think, in the principles in approaching the growth of the sport. And of course, the difference is, in many ways, the NFL is a very focused organization commercially, and therefore very streamlined, and can make reasonably quick decisions on its own destiny, which is much harder in the World Rugby context, where you're gathering the different interests of those nations or groups of nations that may not want to move forward on some things that you wish to move forward on. So, and they both sports that have the unexpected, the shape of the ball and the uneven bounce and so on. But there seems to be a surprise. There used to be a surprise each week in the rugby world, and I'm discovering in the NFL there's some similarities in that sense too. You get a few surprises through media, through player behavior, through events that happen, and those unexpected things that make the whole sports world quite interesting.
That's the one thing that I find, Brett. Like people always say to me, "Oh, there's a 7-month off season." There's not. There's something going on, if not every day, every week. There is always something. But I guess going back to the whole Ireland aspect of it, the one thing that we're really good at is rugby, and we famously or infamously bid for a World Cup, and we fell short of it. But look, it's grand, as you know yourself, Brett. The inherent delights.
It was an amazing bid, by the way. It was.
Yeah.
It obviously, they didn't get the result they wanted to, but it was a superb bid on every criteria, and it matched up against two, really, when you think about it, South Africa, France, World Cup hosts, Rugby World Cup hosts, Football World Cup hosts, Olympic hosts in France's case, soon to be, and so on. So it wasn't as though you're up against shabby competition, but you competed very well. But unfortunately, there's only one winner in that. Sorry, what the question was?
No, it's fine. I was just going to say, so basically today, actually, Brad, it was announced that Northwestern are playing Nebraska in college football in the Aviva. I know over here, as you know, we got the Aviva, we've got Croke Park, and look, and a lot of heritage between NFL owners and this island. Have you any tips on how we can maybe avoid the mistakes of the past for the Rugby World Cup and potentially host maybe down the stretch in the next few years?
There were no mistakes. There were absolutely no mistakes made, and I think Ireland's a great place to come for any sporting event because the fans are amazing, and we know Croke Park's a great stadium and the Aviva as well, but it's mainly the atmosphere in Ireland, and that players and teams and owners, obviously many of them out of America, as you say, have that connection, like to come there. It's difficult to envisage in the near future anyway, regular season games, but certainly, one of the things that we must investigate is, if you can't have regular season games, what is the next best thing? And there's a general belief that preseason games, exhibition games, maybe not taken as seriously as they were, and so on, and maybe that needs further exploration. But I certainly don't think Ireland has any issues or worries around hosting big sporting events of any code, frankly. Because people like to come to Ireland and people know how well they're received there.
Brett, we know about your amazing business pedigree. We've spoken about your time with World Rugby. You were telling us that your first day on the job, though, was at the Super Bowl, and talk about the razzmatazz, the glitz and glamour. Tom Brady gets another trophy. Just interested in hearing your thoughts on that experience, and I suppose your first couple of months on the job.
Yeah, well, it was a fantastic experience. It was literally my first day on the job. I had to spend 7 days in a hotel room with food passed under the door as a sort of quarantine, and they had a bubble system after that you came out into, and I emerged the day of the Super Bowl. And they invested a huge amount of money in tracking and tracing and all the protocols around the players, and it was actually, that in itself was just extraordinary to see people wearing RFID devices that if you got in a lift with someone else, it would beep if you got too close to them, and it was incredibly sophisticated. And in the end of the day, they didn't lose one game in their season because they managed COVID so brilliantly. And against all odds, they put on a full season, which was great to admire. And when I was at the Super Bowl, I could see why that was the case, because the sophisticated protocols and the efforts that went into it were, incredible. But yeah, one of those great moments, obviously, the whole Tom Brady, result and the build up and the hype was fantastic. You had the two quarterbacks of contrasting styles. Buccaneers perhaps didn't have the outing that I've liked. Sorry, Tampa Bay had the outing that they wanted to have. But the Chiefs didn't have the outing that they wanted to have, and it was a bit unfortunate. It sort of didn't have the tight finish that everyone was hoping for. The stadium had about 22,000, I recall. Most of those had been tested, and many of them actually, at that point, was it vaccination or test? My memory's really fading on it. But what was interesting, it looked like a full stadium because they sold to charity seats with people's images all around. So when you came into the stadium and the teams came into the stadium, it felt like a full stadium, and the halftime show and the whole thing. But when you walked outside and left, it felt, well, where has everyone gone? Sort of thing. They're all still lined up in their seats as cardboard cutouts and so on. But look, it'll always be a record, hopefully, in terms of the lowest, attendance of a Super Bowl final. I'm glad I was at that. And obviously it was a record for Tom Brady reasons. And look, it was just great to see those two, Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady, on the same field in a Super Bowl. Fantastic. And it was my first day of work, as I said. Everyone kept saying to me, well, it's all downhill from here. And of course it has been, because you can't beat being a Super Bowl. But look, first impressions are it's a very different culture from World Rugby. It's a very different organization. But both organizations are trying to do the right thing by their stakeholders, but also by the communities and the countries and where they're present. Don't always get it right, neither organization, but they have high ideals and high values. And that's a great starting point. And I can feel that in the corridors of the NFL as much as I could feel it at World Rugby. High commercial focus and it's different. Yeah, one's a governing body of an international sport. The other's a league. You almost should be comparing, the Premiership or the Premier League or top 14 with the NFL. They're different. They're different beasts, if you like. Having said that, the NFL is very involved in growing the sport and taking care of the sport as if it was a governing body of sorts, even though obviously there's IFAF, the governing body as well. Very data oriented, high levels of analytics and analysis around fan engagement and the depth of that engagement, the breadth of that engagement, and you're operating off very, very strong evidence. Incredible fan panels to understand exactly what they like, don't like, the growth of the fan base and so on. So as you'd expect from a very sophisticated American success machine. And I think there's a better example of a league. Well, this is the first league I worked for, but I've always from the outside thought it was, really the reference in the league. I mean, it is the most watched. If America's the reference in sports marketing and the sports business, well, this is the most valuable league, the most watched league, and 17 of the top 20 television rating programs of the last 10 years in America have been NFL games, and that kind of strength and success is for a reason.
Brett, we had the schedule released last week, and obviously huge focus on the London games. And whilst the Falcons announced in advance they were coming, there was a lot of speculation about who the opponents would be and what other games were coming on the top of that game. Just in the end, the four teams that are coming are predominantly East Coast based. They play majority of their games on the East Coast of the States. Was that in the forefront of the thinking in terms of the travel, and I suppose with the pandemic, just making sure they were at ease with those teams coming?
No, look, it wasn't. It just turned out that way. In a way, they were the teams that wanted to come to re-engage with the fan base and so on. Falcons and Jags were the hosts. They were named reasonably early. It's true that Atlanta got out of the gates a bit quick with the PR. but that's fine. It's great to have them over here. The Jags obviously have a good connection and relationship with their fan base on this side, having played this is their 8th or 9th time from memory. So those matchups are good matchups. We've got really good indication of, I mean, almost 3 times as much registered interest than we had in this first day versus other first days in the past. So those who think people are sort of gingerly coming back to stadia, it seems there's a real appetite to return to the atmosphere of a stadium and so on. And of course, with the Jags, you've got the first draft pick, Trevor Lawrence, seemed to be, and must be tough pressure for him, but once in a generation player, that'll be great to watch. Miami's strong support in the United Kingdom. So no, these will be great games. A pity we've only got 2, but we just felt in organising the protocols, in managing out, coming out after a season away and so on, it's much easier to manage 2 games in one stadium than try to manage across 2 stadia and 4 games, which we hope would be the norm that we'd return to in the coming years. So it sort of simplifies things a little bit. And of course, we can't, completely guarantee that stadium will be full by the time October 10 and 17 come around, but we're confident that we'll get full stadia by then. But this pandemic's thrown up a lot of surprises, obviously, for all of us. And things have happened much more slowly than we ever envisaged in the beginning. So we just have to monitor things as we go
along. Brett, good to hear your thoughts on maybe the evolution we can do in terms of international games. And, we might have a few ideas on pre-season games, regular season games, governmental support, local broadcasting around some games in Ireland at some stage. But, we'll talk to you about that later. Don't worry, we'll come to that later on.
You've had some spectacular college games, haven't you, though? Notre Dame, which can
absolutely. And and great visitors and great visitor numbers and great, obviously, governmental support and everything, which be a key thing for NFL, Europe in relation to that. Don't worry, I've got the sales pitch ready. We'll be fine. We'll be fine. But very seriously, I mean, I shouldn't be trying to pitch to you. I mean, after all, you were one of the major leaders in pitching, if you like, being CEO of McCann's, both in New York and for EMEA as well. And in that time, you were not only CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the world, but your clients, of course, are CEOs of some of the most powerful and important brands and companies all around the world. So working in the NFL is kind of a bit more continuing to the same then, isn't it, really?
Is it I guess there are similar, again, what you did in your past, you hope, sets you up and prepares you for what you're doing now. And I guess if they chose me to do the role, they saw something in my past that they felt was going to be very applicable in what I'm doing now. And I think a marketing background was very helpful in the rugby environment, and I think marketing was a very helpful background for this role as well. It was a bit of a leap going into rugby because I hadn't worked in the sports category before, so I had to find my feet for a period of time. Dare I say bluff, but certainly in the beginning. But as obviously you garnered those principles of sports marketing and so on, you were applying your own principles of marketing. So yeah, I think there are perhaps some similarities. Obviously, there are some high level relationships, whether it be with brands, football club owners, committee members, as there was in World Rugby, understanding what's important to a fan base, always seeing things through the eyes of, when you're in advertising, it's called a consumer. When you're in the sports business, it's a fan. And they're not exactly the same. A fan is kind of a consumer with a huge passion. There are consumers with products that have a passion about the products, but most often they're a little bit indifferent, looking to be seduced a little bit and moved over the edge to go with that brand rather than this brand or the other brand. Whereas fans are almost religious in their following of their product, let's call it, and so therefore it's slightly different. But always seeing things through the eyes of the fan or the consumer is a very important thing. I think club owners understand that and see that and feel that, and also to understand, what are the business issues. And I think my experience working with clients and always trying to understand, what was their business model and how could marketing communication help it is good, helpful background. But then there are other backgrounds that would also equally bring something else to the party. But I was happy with the training I got in advertising to come in to the sports world, and so I was fortunate.
Brett, look, you're a guy sort of new into this role. You must be very busy. I know ourselves, fans in Ireland and the UK and Europe, they definitely appreciate your time today. Couple of things. We'd like to invite you to our live show on the 9th of October in London. Don't know where it's going to be at yet, but we will let you know if you're in for the game. And finally, we will see you in LA in February. And thank you very much for your time, man. It's been massively appreciated, and hopefully chat to you again soon.
It's a great pleasure. Anytime.
Our second guest on the Irish NFL show this Friday night is none other than the Vice President in International Marketing and Fan Development for the NFL, Henry Hodgson, over in Los Angeles, home of the next Super Bowl. Henry, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to see all you guys.
Great to chat to you again, Henry. Henry, look, we ask everybody this question, and you're no different. Have you any affinity to Ireland? Have you any family from Ireland?
I don't have family from Ireland, but I obviously am from the UK originally. And one of my favorite things every year after the international games in London when they first started out. So I was in the NFL office in London from 2003 to 2010. But I made a point, because it was a kind of crazy journey up to the London games, and very small team. And so by the end of it, you felt like once the game had kicked off, you were ready to take a nap. And so the week afterwards, I always took a vacation in Ireland, because I love Ireland, and I loved, there's nothing to me, and maybe you guys are bored of it, but at the time, and I definitely actually feel the craving now. The sort of late autumn, early winter in Ireland is a wonderful place to be, because there's no guilt felt if you want to spend the entire day in a pub with the rain lashing down on the window, and just sort of have a nice time. So that was always, for 3 or 4 years, that was definitely something I always did at that time of year. So I'm a huge fan of Ireland. Love the countryside there, and great to be talking to you guys.
Well, we're doing a meetup for week 2, Henry. So, that's that in that kind of autumn period. So if you want to relive that period, come on over for the meetup in week 2. We'd be delighted.
I'm down for it. I appreciate the invite. If I can get there, I will do. One time I went, actually, just on those notes, because I just forgot about it, but I went to a pub in a place called Baltimore in Ireland.
Yeah.
And I walked in, not knowing that this was what I was going to get, and walked into this pub, and it was sort of Ravens themed stuff, or not all over the place, but there certainly was some in there. So I was like, wow, what have I walked into? I was trying to escape from the NFL for a week in Ireland, and instead I found even more.
Yeah, we're down in beautiful West Cork, I imagine. That's a great part of the world. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm from Cork originally, so I know Baltimore well. But you have a long history with the league. I know that you were first a fan because of the Channel 4 coverage. Your dad, I think, had been in the US, and he was a Dolphins fan. You worked with, you interned with, I think, which involved going to Germany. You were with the Monarchs, looking after William the Refrigerator Perry. Can you talk us through, because it's a fascinating journey, and we have a bit of time, so I'd love to hear about your journey into football fandom, right through to being the VP for international marketing and fan development.
Okay, well, yeah, it is a long journey, and I'm glad you've heard some of it already, because you've definitely done a good job of summarizing it there. I'll try to make it quick and not too boring. But it's funny. It sounds like a journey, but at the time it was, there wasn't. A journey implies a destination, and I'm not sure that I necessarily on day one believed that any of the stuff that I was able to do during that time period happened, and I think all the way through I've had to, and it's awesome sort of hearing it, because I have to pinch myself and go, wow, that all happened. But I loved the NFL, first of all, like you guys, and like all your listeners, and like lots of people across the UK and Ireland. I fell in love with the NFL. It's a fantastic sport. It's the best sport in the world, and so I was just like, this is cool. I like watching it. And then I think there came a point in my life where perhaps the realization had set in that I wasn't going to be very good at something that I didn't have a real passion for. And so when I was in school, we had to go off and do some work experience. And I was like, well, look, why wouldn't I try and do something that I'm really into rather than just go and do something for the sake of it for, I think we had to go and do something for a week. So I wrote to the NFL that just had opened an office in London. It was sort of between the two World League and NFL Europe periods. And it was NFL Europe was just starting back up. And they let me go, and there was a preseason game being played in Germany between the Chargers and the Giants, and at the same time there was the European Youth Football Championships taking place sort of alongside each other. And so they invited me to go and sort of just help out there and kind of interned for 2 weeks, I think it was, and got a chance to kind of, you know, get some exposure to working around the NFL and you know, do so, like, even, you know, me, who I think at the age of like 16, 17 then, you know, like I had moments there where I was like, well, nothing gets better than this. You know, there's Lawrence Taylor, who had just retired but was traveling with the team. There's, you know, Junior Seau, that Chargers team wound up going to the Super Bowl that year, so it was pretty cool, you know, having a chance to get exposed to that. But so that was all taking place at the same time, and, you know, I guess made a decent enough impression to when I a couple of years later decided to take a year out between school and university and wrote to them again and said, hey, it's me. Hopefully I didn't put you off too much. Can I come back again? They said yes. And, you know, why don't you come back for a longer time period? Then NFL Europe was back up and running. And so I got a chance to work there. And as you say, at the time, was the Fridge's sort of right-hand man for, you know, to some extent or other when he was playing in the UK for the London Monarchs. So that was the first bit. I'll take a breath there if you've got questions, or I can just keep on going. I think we've only made it like 3 years in, and we've got a long way to go still.
Well, Henry, I'll jump to another angle. So behind all the years of working in the NFL, you're also a Dolphins fan. We've had numerous beat writers on throughout the offseason discussing each team, and we actually haven't had anybody from the Dolphins on. So this is your opportunity. 10-6 last year, very unfortunate to miss out on the playoffs. What's your thoughts on Brian Flores and the team and going forward?
I think the team is in great shape. I think they've got a really, you know, fantastic roster there. I actually, you know, I think it's almost it's weird to say it, because this isn't a team that's had a lot of success recently, but I think it's almost better they didn't make the playoffs last year, just in the sense that the expectations that come with that the following year, you know, there's the bar is just a little bit higher. So I think the fact that they were a good team, they showed, you know, that the defense is definitely on the way up. That Tua was, I think, you know, has been pretty unfairly criticized during the offseason, and actually, you know, for a rookie quarterback, and at least in the way that we used to judge rookie quarterbacks, had the type of season that you'd expect him to have, some high points, some low points, but you know, a really difficult season to gel with your roster, to understand your teammates, to get better from the injury that he'd taken in his final season at Alabama. So I'm excited. I think that it's a really strong roster. They've drafted really well the last couple of years. It feels like they have the nucleus of a team that you know, this year does deserve to be in the playoffs, and the expectations that come after that should be, you know, getting higher and higher. But fingers crossed, touch wood. I've definitely you know, lived through some down years with the Dolphins, having fallen in love with them in the early 80s as a Marino fan. You know, I've gone through some bad times, but this, if I'm really honest, I think with you know, since Dan Marino retired, this is probably the most optimism I've had about the team.
Henry, I'm a Pats fan. I can empathise. I mean, you're there saying it's probably a good thing they didn't make the playoffs. And as a Pats fan, you know, it gets a bit boring. So good thing.
Oh yeah.
Last year, you know, give it a break. Give it a break.
Give it a break, exactly.
But no, on a bit more of a serious note, like obviously loads of people listening are kind of like, geez, I'd love to work in the NFL. I love that sport and everything. And you've just explained to everyone that, well, basically you had to start at 16 and then it all comes full circle and comes through. But fast forwarding a bit, obviously you've evolved your career, as you said, first of all with NFL UK, and now the VP of International Marketing and Fan Development. You know, in that role, I'm going to say, and I'm going to take it with the European angle, obviously, that international games for the not past number of years, obviously until this year, have just meant London, they've met Wembley, obviously Twickenham and Tottenham are in that mix now. And there probably has been a bit of, criticism, I would say, on social media, somewhat unfairly, that all the NFL is focused on is London and the UK in that regard. But of course, the last year now, very clear, like the international scope in Mexico and Canada has always been wider. The international scope in Europe with Germany and everything is very much wider. And of course, you've been dealing with COVID, events and everything else has been difficult to manage. I wonder, could you take us through and take kind of the European, the Irish, the UK fan base a little bit through maybe some of the plans, some of the things you're thinking about and evolving, hopefully through the 21 season, as we hopefully get back to increased normality for everyone around the world?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. I guess, Mark, just first to sort of clarify, for us, international, definitely, as much as possible is the whole world. But the truth and the reality is that it's probably 6 markets primarily. So Canada and Mexico, and I guess the one point you missed there is that we have played games in Mexico for the last, on and off for the last 5 years with a couple of exceptions. Unfortunately, we weren't able to last year, and we're not going to be able to this year because, as you know, that the COVID situation there is a little bit worse than it is in Europe. But we definitely, hope to be able to do that in the future. So Canada and Mexico, obviously also have the benefit of bordering with the US, bit more familiarity with the sport of football. Canada speaks the same language, or at least they'd say maybe it's not quite the same language, but mostly. They also have the big benefit of the time zones working well for them, which is, for you guys, obviously, painfully aware probably at some points during the season that, primetime football in the US is not exactly primetime for Europe. But that definitely helps us grow those markets. Then Europe, you're absolutely right. It's UK and Ireland, I'll say, together. And you guys, obviously, a lot of the marketing that's done in the UK specifically, obviously, falls out into Ireland and helps with the fan growth there. We then have Germany, where we've spent a lot of time over the last few years, and I think anyone who's followed the sport in Europe for some time will obviously be aware of NFL Europe, be aware of what was there before. When NFL Europe shut down, we sort of walked away from a big fan base that had been incredibly well served by NFL Europe and had events and had grown a lot of fandom. And the NFL, there was just a void, there was a vacuum, and it was like a market that had actually quite a lot of money in marketing and a lot of thought and dedication put into it. And then we just exited and put all the eggs in London, games in London. So going back into Germany over the last few years, with a kind of new leadership group, and for the most part, with the exception of, Alistair Kirkwood, who's been in the UK office or had been in the UK office for a long time and had been part of NFL Europe, and myself and probably 2 or 3 others, everyone was like, wow, look, we've got all these fans in Germany. And we were like, well, no, that was the result of some hard work that had happened before. It didn't, it's not just magic and they didn't just show up. But the good news is that, the next generation of fans have come through there. And so we've really seen a lot of momentum in Germany. And I think there'll be some, hopefully Germany will become more and more of an opportunity for the NFL to grow and maybe even play games in that market in the future. And then 2 other countries we spend a lot of time and effort on are China and Brazil. So both really big opportunities in terms of the population. I think in China's case, the NFL football American football is a very foreign sport. So one of the things we're trying to do is educate and engage the sort of sports fan base there to help them understand what this sport is. And then Brazil is like a sports crazy market. Soccer, obviously football number 1 there by a long way, but I think there's also like a real interest in US culture, US sports. And honestly, like from one of the things that I work on is our social media channels around the world, and there's nothing that gets engaged more than NFL channels in Brazil. And I mean like anywhere, including maybe the US. Like the amount of engagement and passion that the Brazilian NFL fans have for the sport is really cool. So those are the markets we're most focused on. There are other places in Europe, especially, I think France and Spain have had a lot of attention, Japan, Australia. But those, when we talk about kind of the world and how do we expand around the world, those are really the 6 countries that we spend the most time on. I'm not sure if I've gone off on a complete tangent there, but that was my attempt at answering your question, Mark.
No, it's all good. And look, in Germany, I was thinking when you were saying it, you've had some great success stories. Talk about Bjorn Werner, Sebastian Vollmer, like there are homegrown heroes, like even in the UK.
Your guy Jakob Johnson.
Yeah, Jakob Johnson, absolutely.
Yep.
You know, who's played fullback for the Pats and is still there in the IPP and everything, which is great. You know, we've got a few Irish players that might be able to play. I mean, like, you think Tom Brady's a story, Henry? Wait till you meet the oldest wide receiver ever to play the game. Brian O'Leary definitely could do a job for the Jets. I'm sure.
I was going to say Dean Rock as a kicker, Mark, but Brian as a...
Brian, so that's your thing. Are you coming to an IPP tryout? I think we may be having an international player combine actually in the UK at some point later this year. So if you think the international player pathway program is for you, you never know, that there could be a spot there.
Henry, I'll kill the conversation there. I've hung up the cleats. I'm 43 now, so.
You look like you could still go.
I'm no Tom Brady. Let's put it like that.
Henry, I'm actually gonna shift it back to almost like your journey to now. Like, but I mean, like, just in terms of what Mark said there, it is incredible to see the growth around the world. Like, I mean, we're quite lucky today. It was announced Northwestern, apologies, and Nebraska are playing in the Aviva. Please God, next year. So it's growing. It's great to see it growing.
Oh, that's awesome! I didn't see that. Congratulations. That's exciting. I mean, I went to one game in Ireland when the Bears and Steelers played each other, and it was amazing.
We can definitely, we will happily do it again, Henry, at some point, and we will see the crack there. Going back to like 97 and around that time, I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were on Jeff Reinbold's show and you were talking about that NFL office in the 90s. I think a certain Neil Reynolds was also there, and Mr. Reinbold as well. Just for people watching, I guess, in Ireland and the UK, what was that like at the time? And like, just looking back on it now, it must have been like just crazy to think now, just to see where everyone's went.
Yeah, it was cool. So it wasn't the 90s quite. We'd made it past the millennium at that point. I think. I rejoined the NFL. I went off to, I guess, to maybe this is good to do it in stages, and you can interrupt me with other questions along the way, but because it's a long story. So I went off to university, and then after university got another job, and then stayed in touch with a lot of people in the UK office or in the London office that I'd been working with the anticipation that like at some point something would happen that would help me get back there, and thankfully they did, and so in 2003 I rejoined the NFL in London, and was responsible for sort of some combination of PR, running the NFL Europe website, so all the club or the NFL Europe team's website, and other bits and pieces. And I think the truth is it was a relatively small office, and everyone kind of did a lot of everything. But yeah, at the time that I rejoined that office, my boss was a guy called Dave Tossell, who is still in the UK office and has been responsible for the NFL's public relations in Europe since 1995, and was actually the guy that I'd worked with or under when I first was there with the Fridge. But then a new character had joined, a guy who had a little bit of hair, but not a whole lot at the time, named Neil Reynolds, who I sat next to. And Neil and I, both Dolphins fans. I obviously knew him, and maybe you guys are aware of the First Down newspaper that used to come out every week. So I would always get that, and obviously had read his work before. So Neil and I became really good friends and worked together for I guess the next 7 years, pretty closely, or really closely. On a number of things from NFL Europe. We used to be in training camp together for NFL Europe, which was kind of the whole month of February and maybe a bit beyond each year, which was great. And during that time, you'd sort of spend a lot of time together, get quite attached to some of the teams, and then you'd have the NFL Europe season where we'd be traveling to games and all those kind of things. So it was a really fun experience, and honestly, I loved it. And I was like, what could be better than what I'm doing now? And then unfortunately NFL Europe got closed down, although I understand the reasoning behind why that happened. I think ultimately it was for the best, if it resulted in us having kind of not the second tier of players playing in a league where every year there'd be so much turnover in players. It was very difficult to kind of get momentum when you'd have this great team, and then if you were successful, all your players would leave. It doesn't feel like the best plan. but then, it evolved into games in London, and, working with the likes of Alistair Kirkwood, the likes of Dave Tossell, with Neil on, that was there was a core team of people who were working on getting that plan and bringing that vision to life. And I'll be honest with you, Alistair was a visionary in the sense that, when he used to, I remember, the first few times it was like, well, we're going to have a game, an NFL game, regular season game in London. It was like, okay, boss, yeah, sure. But he made it happen. And it was because of his leadership and him sort of pulling towards a singular goal. And it was an amazing, it was a wonderful time to be working there. And yeah, along the way, other characters sort of came and went. Jeff was one of those guys, and I absolutely loved working with Jeff and have a strong friendship with him. And honestly, that whole team now, there's Jeff, who's obviously gone off and done, all kinds of different coaching. After he left, he left and then went and took a graduate assistant job in Hawaii, which seemed like he'd been, in a pretty high-powered role in London, and then suddenly went off and did this. It was like, okay, but that was, knowing Jeff's story before that, it was sort of quite on brand for him. Neil, obviously, towards the end of my time there, I'd worked with Neil on some of the media stuff that he was doing, which started with the BBC Radio and then went to Sky. And it's amazing to see him, flying and really becoming the face of the NFL in the UK. Tony Allen, who was part of the football development team, is now, has been a coach and been part of the football scene in the UK forever, and is now the head coach at the NFL Academy in London. There's a guy named Matt Schalger, who was part of, again, the sort of scouting staff for NFL Europe and trying to find the international players, who's now in the Giants pro personnel team. I mean, there's a bunch of, Jim Tomsula, who was, became a good friend during that time period as well, went off and, as we all know, was a head coach with the 49ers and is in the league. Adam Dirty was a player who I became really actually close friends with when he was playing in NFL Europe and was, constantly stayed in touch with, and then became, then worked very closely with again around the player pathway program, and is now a coach for the Dallas Cowboys. So there's so many stories, honestly, that came out of the opportunities that were born in NFL Europe. The bunch of people who've gone on to do amazing things. And we see each other, not on purpose, but sometimes we'll all bump into each other, and there's a combination of like, wow, look what you're doing now, and do you remember that time that whatever happened in whatever European city? So it's always fun to see those guys.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I suppose, even we've had some of those guys on, but also their influence, because we had FA on who talked about the influence of Aidan Dirty and stuff like that. So the ripples continue. And I suppose you talked about Alistair Kirkwood and the visionary, and one of the things, I suppose, alongside Bruce Arians being a brilliant coach, one of the things he's brought is, I suppose, his vision about diversity. And alongside, that Tom Brady lifting the trophy in the home stadium and all that history, there was Sarah Thomas, there was the two Bucks coaches, Morale and Laurie, and you also now have the Broncos hiring, Kelly Klein down from the Vikings. Are we getting closer to a female GM, Henry?
I think so. I mean, I think diversity is across the board. There's work being done. Are we there? Absolutely not. We're not even, we're making a huge amount of progress, and that's all to be celebrated, but that we also know that there's a lot of, we're nowhere near where we need to be. I think that will be one of the moments that will be celebrated, is when the first female GM is appointed in the NFL, and I have no doubt that it will happen at some point in the not too distant future. But I actually think the thing beyond that will be the moment that we just celebrate the fact that a great GM has been appointed, regardless of whether they're male, female, or any other sort of level of diversity. I think it really comes down to when we can look at it all from the perspective of, this is a incredibly talented human who's been appointed to this role. And I think that that, again, a long way off, and we should be celebrating every single milestone along the way. But that's when we'll know that we've really done it, because it almost will be a non-factor.
Henry, when we talk to some people in the States, they can't get over the amount of coverage that we have today. It's second to none. But I recall years ago when I'd be awaiting your updates on the NFL UK forum every week to see which two games Sky would broadcast at the weekend. You know, you'd be refreshing for hours on end.
I remember
Wait,
that.
Yeah, waiting for that
There you go.
update.
Yeah.
Henry, you touched on the passion for the NFL, and obviously you said from a very young age you wanted to make sure you got a job that was, I suppose, convenient and suits the passion that you had for the sport. How did you find then the transition to, I suppose, going to live in the States? Was you had the job that you wanted? Did you find it difficult to make that
Yeah,
change?
it's a great question, and it was a really difficult decision. So I'd been it was a wonderful segue into the next stage of my boring long story. But I'd been working in the UK office for 7 years. There'd been at that point 4 London games. During the time, one of the things that I'd wanted to do for the NFL UK website was to make it, the forum was a huge part of it, and honestly, the amount of at the time, I guess, page views and messages and everything that was generated by that forum is still remarkable to me. But one of the things that we wanted to do was make the rest of the website, which was essentially sort of copy, stories, but not a whole lot of video, was to bring a lot of that to life, and also to help fans who weren't on the NFL UK website, but let's say visiting the BBC Sport website, how do you bring more video content there? So it was really like how do you do that? And along that journey, I met a guy who was based in the LA office, which is obviously where the NFL Media Group, NFL Network, all the NFL websites, mobile apps, etc., are created and published, and all of the writers, etc., who are part of that. Who, ironically, his name is Tom Brady. And Tom became a good friend of mine. And during this process, a job was posted to be responsible for homepage programming for NFL.com, which essentially what meant deciding what went where on the NFL website, as well as then the mobile app. And so I applied for the job, kind of separate to anything I was doing with Tom. And then you pretty much 20 minutes later got an email back from him saying, "This job reports to me. Are you serious that you'd want to do this?" And all of a sudden, honestly, it was something like probably like this time of year, like a May afternoon, when there wasn't a whole lot happening in the NFL UK office, that I'd done kind of on a whim, and was like, well, I'll just go. And I think I wrote on the sort of letter I wrote to them, like, I get it. You could probably look at this and see it's been sent by someone from the UK and go, well, I'm definitely not looking at that because we're not bringing someone from the UK to do this job. But if you do, you'll miss out on getting someone who'd be really good at this, and something like the type of thing I thought maybe an American would want to hear. And sure enough, I guess 2 things. First of all, it landed on the desk of someone who I already had a relationship with. And so he said, okay, if you're serious about this, we can make it happen. And I was like, oh, okay, wow, I wasn't actually expecting to get, I was sort of just wasting some time on a Wednesday afternoon. I wasn't actually expecting to get that response. And I just had my first child, and was suddenly, had to explain to my wife that I'd accidentally got myself a job in the US. So it was an interesting, and we really talked a lot about, should we do it? Should we not? And my perspective was, look, you live once. It's something that we'll never get I'd regret if I didn't do it, and we'll do it for a couple of years and we'll come back and it'll be fine. And here I am 11 years later, still sitting in LA, so you can see how that went. But it was cool. It was amazing. It was a great opportunity. It was really like, we didn't know anyone here. We didn't, as I said, we just had by the time we left, we had a 10-month-old kid. But it was, we quickly found, first of all, like, in the UK, if you told someone you worked for the NFL, even back in 2007, 8, 9, when we'd been playing games, people were like, I don't know what that is, but whatever, great. Obviously, suddenly you're in the heart of it. You're with a team of people. You're around the hub of the NFL kind of news generating piece. So it was really exciting to be a part of, and I had a great boss in Tom, and it was a very cool experience, and I loved LA pretty quickly. It's a hard city not to enjoy living in. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
Henry, just looping back to the question, the point about diversity, on behalf of Raiders fans around the world, I feel like I have to correct you all and emphasize Amy Trask, guys, the first female CEO of the Raiders. True.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Deserves to be mentioned and flagged, is all I say.
For sure.
Henry, continuing on what you were saying there, and you rightfully flag Alistair Kirkwood's vision and that capability, and we've on the show applauded Roger Goodell's vision this year, obviously, and hey, we can still have a 256 game schedule, and we are going to do this, and a massive credit to the NFL in delivering that. He obviously has a longer term vision. He's announced about 25 billion in revenue and continued growth of the game internationally and obviously in America. And by God, with from a business perspective, the vision in terms of the current TV deals are absolutely monumental.
Amazing.
That's just been an amazing growth. But your progression now, obviously, very senior role, and it's about your vision on things as well. And I'm just, I suppose, curious as to how do you find that in terms of now you're setting a stall, obviously within the remit of the NFL and the overall corporate goals, but how do you find that vision setting and kind of being that leader now that you obviously experienced with Roger, obviously, and with Alistair in the past?
It's fun. I think, first of all, having lived a lot of it, you kind of, I have I think a pretty good sense of the progression and how we need to grow. I think we're all very clear that international is the big opportunity, the big growth opportunity for the NFL. Certainly those, the TV contracts are remarkable, and the growth that's been seen there. But the continued growth of the NFL, I think the biggest opportunity is from an international standpoint. How can you make the game truly a global sport? So there's a lot of attention. International sits within a business function within the NFL, which is the strategy and growth function overall. So you can see sort of how it's positioned internally as international is a central spoke in the strategy and growth world. And it's a combination of how do we make sure we have the best possible experience for people like yourself and your listeners who are existing NFL fans? How do you make sure that NFL Game Pass is an amazing product that they can access all the games and all the content you would want to, so that you can have essentially the same, or, I'd hope a better experience than you would do if you were in that position in the US? How do you make sure that our media partners are covering the game in the best possible way, bringing it to life as best as possible, and giving, again, existing fans the coverage that they need? From a consumer products merchandise standpoint, how do we make sure that you guys feel like you're served as well as possible on that front? All of the things that you would get that would engage you as a fan in the US, how do we make that as good or better for our fans globally? And that's a big thing to do, because it means partnering with a lot of people who can give us that reach globally, and it's aspirational, but that's what we want to get to, is really make it so that you guys who are as passionate as any fan sitting in LA or any other part of the US and want to consume the NFL in any different way that you can do, you can do it in as convenient as possible. The one thing we can't change, obviously, is time zones and when games are played, that much at least. But all of those things we can do as much as we possibly can do. So that's one part of it, I think. And then the other bit is, and I think it can sometimes, it's certainly going back to those NFL UK forums, actually, there's a little bit of a, and this is true across the world, certainly not just in the UK, that there's we're existing fans. We don't need to see all that, we don't need to keep hearing about who the local heroes are, or we don't need to keep, having the rules spoon fed to us or whatever else. But I think one other part of it, which is incredibly important to us, is how do you get new fans? How do you get people who are fans of sport generally, or who are young kids who haven't discovered the NFL? How do we bring them in? And some of that is kind of making the sport a bit more basic, because again, I always liken it to, it's like an onion. You peel, the more you peel, the more you can discover about football and about the tactics and strategy, and then getting super into contracts or free agency rumors or all those mock drafts. You can keep on going, but at the outset, it is it looks weird. It doesn't look like any sport that you play locally, at least. The rules are kind of confusing. So how do we what are the ways that we can just pique people's interest in the sport? And I think that, especially when you get into the couple of those countries I mentioned, like China and Brazil, how do you do it in a way that essentially is just wow, this looks amazing visually. These athletes are unbelievable. These are the best athletes in the world. And especially for like the younger audience who like to consume things in different ways to people our age, no offense, gentlemen, but it's about short form content and video on your mobile phone and everything like that. How do we do it in a way that's going to really kind of be appealing to those people? So long answer to your kind of question on what is the strategy, but I think those are the types of things that we're really focused on, is really essentially like creating a great experience for existing fans so that they really feel like they're being served by the NFL, no matter whether they're sitting in Japan or in New York. And then secondly, like making it as accessible as possible to a young new fan base who just are like, what is this thing? Is it cool? Oh, it looks kind of cool. I want to know more about it. I want to get into this.
Yeah, completely agree. And Henry, look, it's been a very difficult year for all sports, not just the NFL with COVID. I personally, and I think these boys would agree as well, I think the games that London have this year, touch wood, they're really fantastic games. Like, looking at Tua against Trevor, I think that's just, it literally sells itself without looking at any other element almost. I think for me, obviously the Falcons came out and just announced that they were playing in London, and it was great for us. 5 minutes of midnight, I was lying in bed going, here we go, it's happening now. But I mean, you must be very excited for the prospect of those two games this year before we even look at the whole Germany-Mexico situation next year.
Yeah, really. Like, I think I'll be honest, when I first saw the games a few weeks ago, I was like, okay. And this was pre-draft, mind you. So like, it didn't blow me away. But then actually, as you got through the draft and you're like, okay, wow, look at the pieces that these teams added. Like, these are really exciting games. The Falcons, I'm annoyed still with them because I really wanted the Dolphins to draft Kyle Pitts. But that's a player that will be really exciting to see him playing in London. I think the Jets, it is hard for me to say anything too nice about the Jets, but as a Dolphins fan, but I would say that hopefully for the sake of that team and for their long-suffering fan base, they've found a quarterback now that they can get behind. I definitely believe in their head coach. I think Robert Saleh is going to be a really great hire for that team, and they're certainly a team that's on the up and up. So if you look at just the young pieces and sort of star players, fingers crossed Julio is still with the Falcons at that point, or even tomorrow. But I think that's a game that it would be exciting for fans in the UK to say, wow, look at all the talent that's on that field. But then you're absolutely right. Yeah, the Dolphins Jags game, again, I'm biased and I will admit to that fully. But I think, again, the amount of young talent, Tua and Trevor, everything else on those two teams, I think that's a really great game. And put on top of that, is going to be played in the UK at that Tottenham Stadium, which is just fantastic. And I love, having been there and witnessed the couple of games we had there in 2019. I don't know if fans were more excited or it's just the acoustics in there are so good. And it was definitely, one of the games was when FA was playing there. So obviously there was a sort of home bias there a little bit, but it was so loud and it's such a great atmosphere that I can't wait, knowing that how passionate, especially the Dolphins and Jags fan base are in the UK. I think that will be an amazing spectacle.
Henry, I suppose it seems that this off season, almost more than any other, right? There have been so many different talking points. Be it Russell Wilson goes on Dan Patrick, Aaron Rodgers. We now have the Tebow mania maybe returning down in Jacksonville.
Okay.
Is that the case that there's just more happening, or is this because of social media, or is this recency bias?
I think there's more. I don't think it's recency bias. I think there's more happening in the off season now than there used to be, and that's it's an effort that the NFL has made to try and have more of a year-round presence. There was a point, and it really wasn't that long ago, even in our respective careers, kind of as fans of the NFL, that the combine really wasn't a thing, and the draft was kind of for nerds, and then the season started back up in September, and really now there isn't a month that doesn't have some kind of high water moment. You've got the combine, you have free agency, the draft is a thing, schedule release has become a thing, which is amazing. But even in the last couple of weeks, we've seen that. We all witnessed it, obviously, with the announcement of the London games. There's maybe a small period, perhaps June doesn't have its thing, but then then it's training camps and preseason, and we're off again. I think I think social media and the fact that athletes are now seen as celebrities as well, and have these opportunities, more opportunities than they had in the past to just say things out loud on podcasts, on whatever, means that there's going to be inevitably more of these types of stories generated. But I definitely think that the era of the players having a little bit more power than they had before, and being able to say things that then get reactions about, I want a different experience or a different team or whatever. This is not a one-off. I think this is here to stay, and it'll be really interesting to see how much these quarterbacks actually are able to do the things that they'd like to be able to do. It's funny, I was talking to someone yesterday who's a really talented producer on the NFL Network features team, and she was saying, why would Aaron Rodgers go somewhere else? Because the Packers are, it's a good team. They've been to the NFC Championship game 2 years in a row. And I thought it was a really good point. It's like, is it just that Aaron Rodgers wants to be in the news at a time when, we spend a lot of time talking about Aaron Rodgers from September to February when he was the NFL MVP? And did he just feel like he wasn't getting enough coverage? But yeah, there's each of those guys clearly has a valid reason for saying the things they said and potentially generating the headlines that they generated. But I think actually, if you look at them each individually, it's like, are you sure the grass is greener somewhere else?
Henry, whilst we're talking about players, and I suppose we're not looking too far ahead to next season. I know it's May, but haven't had time to go through free agency and the draft. Is there any particular teams that you see emerging that are floating under the radar next season?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's a great question. I think I being in LA, and I was always a fan of this team. But I think the Chargers have a really good shot. I think we all know they've been unlucky a lot of times. Injuries, the injury bug always seems to bite them. I was a huge Phillip Rivers fan. I love Phillip Rivers as much as any other player in the last decade that I've watched. I just absolutely loved watching him play. But I also feel kind of the same way about, or I'm beginning to feel the same way about Justin Herbert. So I think that's a team that if things don't go wrong for them from an injury standpoint, I think they could be, and maybe not a huge surprise, but certainly I guess it would be a surprise if they actually won the AFC West. So that's a team. I think the Cowboys, if you look kind of down the roster, is a team that should have been better than they've actually performed over the last few years. So I think that's another one that I could see being, maybe outperforming what people think they can do. But again, in a division that's probably not that challenging. So maybe it wouldn't be a huge surprise if they came out on top there. Who else? I mean, I have to say the Dolphins, but again, that's A, bias, and B, maybe that it wouldn't be that much of a surprise because they showed some of it last year. The 49ers, I think, will be a lot better. I think that they had that sort of 1 year blip, but I think that they're closer to the team that played in the Super Bowl a year prior to that than they are, in terms of actual talent than the one that finished last season. Those are some teams, I guess, I would
Henry,
say.
that Cowboys defense, I think, was ranked 31 last year, and they've signed majority of their free agency defense from the Falcons, who were ranked 30. So
yeah,
hopefully that trend continues, because I'm a Giants fan, so I'll happily see that team.
I'll tell you what, I'm a huge believer in Dan Quinn. And I think, he has, wherever he's gone, got more out of the defense than the talent that was necessarily there. So I will be a believer in that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, my friend Adam Dirty, I think he will get a lot out of that defensive line. So part of that probably is bias as well. But I definitely I believe that they could do it. But I think the Giants are another team. Honestly, if with and it's not dissimilar to the Dolphins, right? I think the question mark. I think all the other pieces are there. The question mark is around the quarterback and can he get over the hump?
Yeah.
I thought the question was, is he any good? But still, that's
it was a nice way of saying that.
Yeah,
make or break here, we'll call it. Yeah,
exactly.
I was actually thinking you could have said the Jets as well, because they can't get much worse, frankly.
Well, that's true. Yeah, there's some of them where it's just like the only way is up, I guess.
Yeah. Henry, I loved actually you just bringing us through, if you like, the year, and we all think of that as well. Like, I mean, it is now a year of NFL coverage. There is no break. Like, even after we finished our draft show, we were like, oh, that's a break for a while. And we're like, well, actually, training camp isn't that far away now. Once we do training camp and rookie mini camp, etc.
Yeah.
Well, with all of that, even the NFL honors is actually, you know, something that's quite funny, whether it's Peyton or you know, Kevin Hart, I think, hosted one year and stuff, and you catch up with that. But still, with all of that, with the combine being something, the NFL honors, rookie minicamp, training camp, the whole shebang, the whole year-round thing, Pro Bowl is still something that desperately needs fixing. Any thoughts? I know we've done the skills challenge and things like that, but, you know, as a fan experience and thing, I think that's still something the NFL's trying to perfect. It's probably fair to say.
I think the skills challenge, I think a lot of the experimentation that's been done around Pro Bowl is really fun. And I've been lucky enough to kind of be around it over the years. Like the player draft, the kind of player celebrity draft that took place was a very cool experience. I mean, I remember sitting literally in the middle of that. I probably shouldn't tell this story, but there was definitely all the, you know, the players were all sitting there waiting to be drafted by the captains or whatever was going on, but the offensive line had all kind of hidden behind a curtain and had like 30 kegs of beer back there, and it was like, we need to get these guys drafted pretty quickly before drafting them is not going to be a good idea for their respective teams. I probably shouldn't tell that story, but you know, I actually honestly I think the skills challenge is amazing, and as someone with kids, putting that on, and my kids would rather honestly sometimes watch, you know, they'll go back and watch the YouTube of like Jarvis Landry catching a ball being dropped by a helicopter or a drone or whatever from whatever height, like all of that stuff. I don't necessarily think the Pro Bowl is for football purists, and I don't think football purists should necessarily be looking for that. I think it's probably a great way, again, like I was saying, to bring new people into the sport, or at least to expose some of this stuff. And you know, this is the generation of players that's playing now. This is the kind of content that they want to create as well, is something that's sort of viral and different and whatever. So I think trying to give them that opportunity is as important as it is helps us bring in new fans, which is, you know, ultimately, like we've all just watched 255 games at that point. And do we really need the Pro Bowl to be like a serious football occasion, or can it be a fun celebration? Do we even need, you know, I guess the bigger question is, do we even need to play a game? And could it just be the honor of having been selected by your peers and fans as one of the representatives of the two conferences, and then this kind of, you know, event that takes place, but maybe not with a football game at the end of it?
Yeah. Could you just get Andy Reid to do the kick, pass, punt challenge?
That would be great. That would be great. I'd be down for that.
I would actually love number one against number two, winner gets first pick, as well as everything they got there. But Henry, last one from me. Colin was talking about a Dublin meetup. We got a Belfast meetup. We got a London meetup before the first game. Adam Rank has invited us to his vineyard, or some vineyard, before the Super Bowl. We're planning on going over.
Vineyard? I did not know that.
I know. Well, he said come over. We'll go to a vineyard, so I'm presuming that you'll be there as well. But we're definitely looking forward to that Super Bowl. I'm presuming, obviously, you know, you're in LA. That's going to be a fantastic week for that city.
It's really cool. So where I live, I literally, if I walk up the street, you know, 200 yards, there's a hill, and I can see the stadium from there. And it's, you know, it's a 10-minute drive away. So it's going to be really cool. Like, as much as I love traveling for the Super Bowl, and it's always an amazing week, it's going to be interesting and different, at least, to have to be at one at home. So I can't wait. It's going to be, I think, you know, fingers crossed, pandemic is over and people are able to travel and come in from all around the world, and from the two teams that are involved. You know, a lot of Dolphins fans, I'm sure, will be in town to watch them. And I think LA, you know, it's that new stadium is amazing, and we're about to move the NFL office in LA to a building literally right next to the stadium, which is going to be really cool as well. So I think just being around that, being around the, you know, everything that's planned for the Super Bowl. It'll be an amazing event. So definitely, if you guys can make it, come. We'll go to Adam Rank's vineyard, which I had no idea existed, but good for him. And we'll have a great time.
Henry, seeing as though you're not too far from the stadium, you might not be too far from the hotel, which we're already booked into. So
okay, well, there you go.
Don't tell him where you live.
I don't want to disclose to the viewers where we're staying, but not too far from the stadium.
Everyone.
I think Adam might own the vineyard. He might have just thought that with Brian O'Leary coming over, we could take it over, Henry. I think.
I see. Okay, I bet he does. Adam Rank is a man of mystery, so it could be that he actually owns it.
Well, you've been very generous with your time, and clearly you're doing a great job with the NFL. I just see, that there was a tweet, I think, that went out about the Lakers Warriors drew an audience of about 5.6 million last night, and Andrew Brandt quote tweeted it to say, just a reminder that twice that many people watch Roger Goodell read names from a list every April. So I think you took us through just how big the league has become and the way in which it has. There is something every month. We are looking forward already to training camp and the new season, and we just want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate your time, Henry.
Well, thank you. And look, I mean, again, I think it was probably off air, but we were saying at the beginning, to draw the curtain back, it's now nearly 1 o'clock in the morning, I think, your time or whatever, and it is like the passion of the fans in the UK. And whenever I'm sitting here watching games that, by the way, the West Coast is a very convenient place to live when it comes to NFL games, because even the late games aren't very late. I always remember, what it's like to be a fan in the UK. And so, what you guys do, both in terms of just being fans and consuming the sport, but then also creating this and bringing new people into it and making the amazing content that you guys do to engage fans. This is what we're talking about. Like, it's not so much about, some of it is about the NFL doing it and bringing new fans in and doing stuff to engage fans. But then the stuff that I love, and I listen to all kinds of podcasts. I love podcasts, honestly, but I listen to all kinds of podcasts. The stuff I love is when it is fans doing it for themselves and doing it because they're passionate about it, because that's the real stuff. So thank you guys for everything that you do to help promote the NFL and bring it to the audience that you have in Ireland.
Our final guest on our international special on the Irish NFL show, looking at the growth of the NFL both in the UK, Ireland, and Europe, and the rest of Europe, is Victor from NFL France. Victor, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
And you can check out Victor's work at NFL France. Victor, I have been told that you have a small affinity to Ireland. Have you previously been in Dublin before?
Yes, I've studied there. I did my Living Cert in Ireland, and then I went to university. The American University, and so I've lived there for like most of my teenage years, and then I moved back to Paris after that.
And I suppose for viewers, Victor, how was it that you came to first be interested in American football and the NFL?
It all started with my father. Ever since I was a kid, we used to go to America pretty much every year. And he's a huge Miami Dolphins fan. And so he brought me to games, and that's how I got into it. And I started following football ever since. And my interest grew every year more and more. And now I'm lucky enough to be working for the NFL. So it's a dream come true.
Victor, you've moved it to the next level like ourselves. We've been over to games in the States, and I believe you've been to quite a few different venues. Any great experiences you wish to tell us about?
I mean, most of the time, because obviously during the summer is the preseason games, so most of the times I was only able to see preseason games. So I've only been to a few regular season games. I still haven't been to the playoffs, so that's obviously a goal, because that's obviously the next level. But the experience that I most look forward to is the Hall of Fame, because I've been there, and you can feel the atmosphere is just special there. Where you see all these legends, and it's just how they put an impact on the league and on us, because I went to the Dan Marino Hall of Fame, which is pretty much the reason why I got into it, because as I said, my father was a big Dolphins fan, and so that was like one of the big things for him, and for me as well.
Victor, we're all looking for our local heroes, our local teams, effectively, our players to support and follow. And I think of the French impact in the NBA in particular, Tony Parker, Boris Diaw, Rudy Gobert and people like that. There's a load of French players there that people can look up to and follow. When it comes to the NFL, and I'm sure you're equally interested in maybe seeing French players through the college system or locally break through, how close do you feel, are there any prospects you're keeping your eye on in terms of French professionals that particularly might make it in the NFL and give people, the fans in France someone to follow closely as well?
Unfortunately, it's a bit tough because it's kind of, we don't have like it's much easier for people to play basketball in France. We don't have like all the facilities, and obviously everything, we have to get the gear and everything else. So unfortunately there's not enough teams, and obviously as well the fact that the games are mostly during the night, so it's kind of hard for people to follow the season. And so obviously now it's getting bigger and bigger. From last year, the L'Équipe, which is like the biggest newspaper in France, bought the rights to broadcast the games in France. So that was like a massive thing. So obviously the interest is growing and growing, and hopefully with that people can get more interested and start trying to play themselves, and that will start to get the ball rolling. But there are a couple of names here and there. For example, this year at the International Pathway Program, there was a French player there. Unfortunately, he did not get selected, but that did get eyes on it, because people were like, oh, if he was able to get selected, maybe I can also start playing and maybe get myself noticed and maybe get to the NFL. So obviously it's obviously a small step, but it's going to get bigger and bigger like that for the years.
Victor, at your time with NFL France and your time with being a French NFL fan, how have you found the development of the fans in France? Obviously, a country with a massive population, up there with the UK and Germany. Have you found there to be maybe a sizable growth over the last few seasons, or has it been different?
Yes, I think so, because that was like the main reason why I started the Twitter account. It was just, I have a friend of mine who is big into following basketball, and he saw that people would write about basketball in French, which was really not a big thing back then. And he told me, you really like the NFL, you should do the same for American football. And I started doing that, and every year I kept getting more and more followers. And then it just got bigger and bigger. And then last year, the NFL even contacted me to work with them. So it's obviously growing more and more. And as I said, again, like with the biggest channels starting to broadcast games, it's only going to get bigger and bigger, hopefully. And obviously now we know that the NFL wants to expand and have games maybe in different countries. So if we keep growing, maybe one day we'll have a game in France, and that would change a lot of things probably.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the dream for fans in Europe, is to have a game in their home country. But you've spoken to us about your dad's affinity for the Dolphins and your trips over and into Canton and the Hall of Fame. For you, is there a particular team that you keep an eye on?
Unfortunately, it's the Falcons. It's a shame, but it is what it is.
And what about the this year, the off season, and I suppose in terms of what do you think about the Kyle Pitts pick? And I suppose the news today as we're recording this around Julio Jones, is Julio going to be traded, or do you think he plays another season with the Falcons?
I hope he stays, but it's pretty difficult because it doesn't really. I don't really know what the plan is, because I would think if they wanted to trade Julio, they would have. It means they wanted to rebuild. And if they wanted to rebuild, I would have thought they would have picked a quarterback at number 4. So I'm not sure what the real plan is. If it's this year, it's to try to fix the cap, because obviously it's in a really bad space. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. And hopefully he stays, because he's obviously one of my favorite players, and I really want him to finish his career in Atlanta.
Victor, we were fortunate to speak to Brett Gosper earlier in the show, and he was discussing the UK games. Have you had the opportunity to travel over to any of the UK games over the years?
Yes, I've been to 2 games. I think it was Dolphins against the Saints or Giants, and another one was it the Saints and Giants. I'm not sure, but I've been twice. It was at the earlier stage, pretty much when the NFL UK stuff started. I haven't been back there, but it's something I would like to see because obviously with the new Tottenham Stadium, I think it would be a cool opportunity to discover that stadium and see how things have improved over the years.
You're also you're fortunate that the location in which you're in, you could potentially pick up that Germany game when it comes along, potentially next season. And the UK games are a great experience, but Germany will be a very different environment for all fans to experience.
Yes, for sure. Hopefully, maybe that's something I would try as well, because it's closer and easier to get there than flying across the Atlantic.
Victor, I know obviously you're a massive NFL fan, and I'm going to ask you to take the Falcons hat off. And I hate asking you to do this in the middle of May, but after the draft and after how free agency is gone, is there any team that's kind of caught your eye that you're kind of thinking this could be their year? They've really built up, or you were so excited by their draft that you think, yeah, that's going in the right direction?
Well, I mean, at first thought, sorry, I would just say the Chiefs, because obviously the main problem for them was the offensive line, and they've really spent their offseason rebuilding it. So I think it would be obviously an obvious pick, but I think that would be mine for the next year. Other than them, I really like the Chargers draft, but obviously it's pretty much the same issues every year with them. Will their players be able to stay healthy? Because that's been a problem most years. So, well, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
And the natural follow-on to that then is, and then therefore, what would be in May? Don't worry, you can disclaim it. What would be the pick for hoisting the Lombardi in February next year?
Well, as I said, I'm pretty sure it would be the Chiefs. I would pick Patrick Mahomes as my MVP as well early on.
Come on.
Just finally for me, Victor, can you maybe tell people, I guess in Ireland, the UK, and maybe further afield a bit about the NFL France account? There's some really cool content, which I guess is looked at to that French audience.
Yes, so obviously, as I said, when it started, it was mostly to speak about the football games in France and tell the people obviously the news. So anytime like something a trade comes down or something like that, we try to explain what happened in French and try to explain the details. And if people have questions about some details, we try to explain them as much as we can. And obviously, we bring the schedule for the season, and we try to make cool looking graphics and try to add some videos to talk about the history of the NFL and try to gain more eyes on it and get people interested.
Victor, I have seen your love of the game firsthand during your time in Dublin, and we will be having a Dublin meetup for week 2. So if you want to come back, you're more than welcome to join the Irish NFL show in the Woolshed on week 2, or to join us on the 9th of October in London for our London show. But we'd love to have the opportunity to meet up with you there, and it's great to see the kind of the game grow all around the world, and fantastic to have the opportunity to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and it's, as you said, it's great to see that, and hopefully we can keep our ways to keep the game growing in Europe.